Settle down, you beautiful, sleep-deprived history enthusiasts. Welcome back to Beyond Midnight, where we peel back the layers of the past, not with gentle archaeological brushes, but with a rusty medieval shovel and, frankly, a distinct lack of sleep. Tonight, we're not going to talk about glorious knights, or elegant ladies, or even the grand architecture that somehow still stands despite the sheer, unadulterated filth of the era. No, no, no. Tonight, we're plunging headfirst, like a pig into its own sty, into the soul-crushing, gut-wrenching, utterly, profoundly horrific reality of being a medieval peasant. And let me tell you, if you think your Monday morning commute is bad, or your student debt is crippling, or your landlord is a demon, just you wait. By the end of this, you'll be kissing your ergonomic office chair and thanking whatever deity you believe in that you weren't born in, say, 12th century England, or France, or Germany, or anywhere, really. Because medieval peasant life wasn't just hard, it was a perpetual, grinding nightmare, lubricated by sweat, tears, and an alarming amount of human and animal waste. So grab your strongest coffee, maybe something a little stronger if you're feeling brave, because we're going deep. And by deep, I mean into the very fabric of human misery. Let's start with the absolute basics, shall we? You wake up. Or rather, you don't really wake up because you never truly slept. You've been lying on a straw mattress, if you're lucky, shared with your entire family, possibly a few chickens, and definitely, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, a thriving metropolis of fleas, lice, and bedbugs. Your bed is probably just a pile of straw, maybe a sackcloth covering on the dirt floor of your hut, the hut itself. Though it's a masterpiece of architectural despair. We're talking wattle and daub, a fancy term for sticks woven together and plastered with a delightful mixture of mud, clay, and animal dung. Yes, dung, for insulation. Just let that sink in. There are no windows, or if there are, they're just unglazed holes, shuttered against the elements, plunging your living space into perpetual gloom. The only light comes from the doorway or the central hearth, which is also your cooking fire. And where does the smoke go, you ask, with your fancy modern sensibilities? Nowhere. It fills the hut, stinging your eyes, coating your lungs with soot, and giving everyone inside a lovely, hacking cough that will probably never go away. So your first breath of the day is a lungful of acrid wood smoke, mingled with the delightful aroma of stale human body odor, animal musk, and whatever rancid food scraps are festering in the corner. Good morning, sunshine. You stumble out, probably already aching from a lifetime of backbreaking labor, and what do you see? More of the same. The village is a cluster of these identical, miserable huts, surrounded by muddy paths that double as sewers whenever it rains. And it always rains, or it's freezing, or it's sweltering. The weather, my friends, is not your friend. It is an active, malevolent force, directly impacting whether you eat or starve. Because let's talk about food. Oh, the food. Forget your artisan sourdough, your organic kale, your ethically sourced free-range chicken. Your diet, if you're lucky, consists of gruel. And when I say gruel, I mean a thin, watery porridge made from whatever grain you manage to harvest: oats, barley, rye, maybe some coarse wheat if you're practically royalty. It's bland, it's monotonous, it's barely nutritious. You eat it for breakfast, you eat it for lunch, you eat it for dinner. Every single day. Occasionally, if you're incredibly fortunate and the Lord hasn't taken too much, you might get some stale bread, hard as a rock, full of grit from the millstones and probably crawling with weevils. Protein, what's that? Maybe, just maybe, on a very rare occasion, you might get a bit of cheese or some dried fish if you live near the coast. Meat, meat is for the Lord. Meat is for the church. Meat is for the nobility. You, my friend, get to watch them feast while you chew on your gruel. And speaking of chewing, your teeth, gone, rotted out by the time you're 30. From the coarse grain, the lack of hygiene, the sheer inability to see a dentist because, well, dentists don't exist in any meaningful way. If you get a toothache, you suffer. If it gets infected, you die. Simple as that. No root canals, no fillings, just agony followed by the sweet release of death. But the food situation isn't just about monotony. It's about the constant, gnawing fear of famine. One bad harvest, one prolonged drought, one unusually harsh winter, and suddenly that gruel becomes a luxury. People are literally dropping dead in the fields, their bellies swollen, their eyes hollow. You're watching your children waste away, their cries of hunger echoing in the smoky hut, and there's nothing you can do. Nothing. No government relief, no food banks, just the cold, hard, unyielding reality of starvation. This wasn't a rare occurrence. It was a recurring nightmare, woven into the very fabric of medieval life. People lived with a perpetual anxiety about the next harvest. Did the rains come? Was there a blight? Did the Lord's men trample the crops during a skirmish? Every single factor was a potential death sentence. And even if you didn't starve, you were probably riddled with parasites. Intestinal worms were practically a given. You're living in close quarters with animals, drinking from questionable water sources, and personal hygiene is, well, it's not really a thing. Which brings us quite naturally to disease. Oh, the diseases, forget your seasonal flu. We're talking dysentery, smallpox, measles, consumption. That's tuberculosis to you and me, typhus, and the granddaddy of them all, the Black Death. The Black Death, which wiped out a third to half of Europe's population in a few short years. Imagine that. Imagine waking up one morning to find your neighbor, your friend, your family member, covered in hideous black buboes, convulsing, and then just gone. And then the next day, another, and another, the air thick with the stench of death, the cries of the dying, the constant fear that you're next. And what's your medical treatment? Bloodletting. Yes, let's drain the precious bodily fluids from an already weakened, feverish patient. That'll help, or maybe some leeches, or a poultice made of herbs and, well, probably more dung. Or perhaps the local wise woman will give you a charm or a prayer or tell you to rub a dead mouse on the affected area. Spoiler alert, none of it works. You suffer, you die, and if you're lucky, you die quickly. Childbirth, a death sentence for a terrifying percentage of women. Infant mortality, absolutely staggering. Half your children might not make it past the age of 5. Think about that for a second. You bring a child into this world, you love them, you nurture them, and you know deep down that there's a coin-flip chance they won't even see their next birthday. The grief, the constant, gnawing grief, must have been an unbearable weight. And yet, life went on because it had to. You had to produce more hands for the farm, more bodies for the Lord. Now let's talk about the work. Oh, the work. This isn't your 9 to 5, sitting in a climate-controlled office, complaining about your Wi-Fi. This is dawn to dusk, back-breaking, soul-crushing manual labor every single day for your entire life until your body simply gives out. You are literally tied to the land. You are a serf. What does that mean? It means you don't own the land you work. The Lord does. You are his property in all but name. You can't leave without his permission. You can't marry without his permission and probably a fee. You can't even inherit your father's plot without paying a harriet, often the best animal your family owns, or a large sum of money. Imagine that. Your father dies and the Lord comes to claim your only cow, leaving your family even more destitute. Your life revolves around the agricultural calendar. plowing in spring, sowing, weeding in summer, harvesting in autumn, thrashing in winter. And it's all done with the most primitive tools. A wooden plow pulled by oxen if you're lucky, or maybe just you and your family pulling it yourselves. Scythes, sickles, flails. No tractors, no combines, no automated anything. Just raw, unadulterated human muscle, day after day, year after year. And you don't just work your own small, scattered strips of land. Oh no, you have to work the Lord's land too. This is called corvée labor, and it's mandatory. You spend several days a week, sometimes more, tilling, sowing, and harvesting the Lord's domain before you even touch your own crops. So by the time you get to your own meager plot, you're already exhausted, aching, and probably resentful. But you do it because if you don't, there are consequences, and those consequences are not fun. Because the Lord, my friends, is judge, jury, and executioner. He holds the local court, and his word is law. Dispute with a neighbor, the Lord decides. Stole a loaf of bread because your children were starving, the Lord decides. Insulted the Lord's bailiff, oh, you are in for it. Punishments are brutal and swift. Fines, public humiliation, mutilation, chopping off hands, ears, and for serious offenses, hanging. And there's no appeal, no higher court, just the Lord's arbitrary will. And let's not forget the taxes. Oh, the taxes. You pay a portion of your harvest to the Lord as rent. You pay a portion of your harvest to the church as a tithe, literally a tenth of everything you produce, whether you can afford it or not. You pay fees to use the Lord's mill to grind your grain because you're not allowed to have your own. You pay fees to use his oven to bake your bread. You pay fees for just about everything. It's a constant drain, leaving you with barely enough to survive, let alone thrive. You are trapped in a system designed to extract maximum labor and resources from you, while giving you the absolute minimum in return. And the church, don't get me started on the church. While it offered some solace, some hope of a better afterlife, it was also another oppressive institution. Fear of eternal damnation was a powerful tool. You paid your tithes, you attended Mass, you confessed your sins not just out of piety, but out of sheer bone-chilling terror of hellfire. The church was rich, powerful, and demanding. It controlled your spiritual life and a significant chunk of your worldly goods. Your world, by the way, is tiny. You are born in this village, you live in this village, and you will die in this village. Most peasants never traveled more than a few miles from their birthplace. The outside world is a terrifying, unknown place, filled with bandits, wild animals, and other villages just like yours, probably full of suspicious strangers. News travels slowly, often distorted, and is mostly irrelevant to your daily struggle for survival. Your horizon is the next field, the next harvest, the next sunrise. And what about entertainment? There isn't any. No Netflix, no video games, no concerts. Your entertainment is working, sleeping, and maybe, just maybe, on a saint's day, a brief respite from labor, a village feast where you might get a bit of ale if you can afford it, and some rough music. Storytelling, gossip, and the occasional brawl are your primary forms of amusement. Your life is monotonous, predictable, and utterly devoid of anything resembling modern comfort or stimulation. Hygiene, as I mentioned, is non-existent. Bathing is rare, perhaps once or twice a year if you're feeling adventurous, and often communal in a cold river. Clothes are made of coarse wool or linen, rarely washed and worn until they fall apart. The smell must have been truly, truly awful. Imagine an entire village, every single person, perpetually unwashed, living in smoke-filled huts with animals, surrounded by mud and excrement. The air would have been thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, animal waste, wood smoke, and decay. You wouldn't just smell it, you'd taste it. It would be in your clothes, your hair, your very pores. And let's not forget the constant threat of violence. While you're busy toiling, lords are feuding, kings are warring, and who pays the price? You do. Your village might be plundered by passing armies, your crops trampled, your livestock stolen, your women violated. You might be conscripted into the Lord's army, given a rusty spear, and sent to die in a pointless battle for someone else's ambition. There's no protection, no police force, just the brutal reality of might makes right. The sheer physical toll of this life is almost unimaginable. By the time you're 30, you look 60. Your body is ravaged by arthritis, by injuries that never healed properly, by constant malnutrition, by the sheer physical strain of manual labor. Life expectancy is brutally short, often in the 30s or 40s, and that's skewed by high infant mortality. If you made it to 50, you were an ancient, wizened elder, a survivor against all odds. Every single day is a struggle against hunger, against disease, against the elements, against the oppressive weight of the feudal system, against the arbitrary power of your lord, against the constant fear of famine and war. There is no upward mobility. There is no escape. Your destiny is fixed from the moment you are born. You are a peasant. Your children will be peasants, and their children after them. And yet somehow they endured. They found small joys. The warmth of the fire on a cold night, the simple taste of a harvested apple, the laughter of a child, the camaraderie of neighbors in shared hardship. They built communities, they practiced their faith, they found ways to survive against all odds. But let's not romanticize it. Let's not pretend it was some idyllic, simple life close to nature. It was brutal. It was short. It was often utterly miserable. You thought that was bad, didn't you? You thought, okay, gruel, fleas, dead kids, got it. Horrific. Oh, my sweet summer child. That was just the appetizer. We've only just begun to plumb the depths of the existential despair that was the daily bread, or rather, the daily lack of bread of the medieval peasant. Let's talk about the mind. Because while your body was being systematically destroyed by labor and disease, your mind wasn't exactly getting a spa day. Imagine your world. It's tiny, as we established. Your village, the Lord's manor, the church, maybe a few neighboring hamlets if you're feeling adventurous. Beyond that, the unknown. And the unknown in the medieval mind was not a place of opportunity or discovery. It was a place of monsters, of demons, of witches, of bandits. Of terrifying, inexplicable forces that could ruin your life in an instant. Your understanding of the world was filtered through the lens of superstition and fear. Why did the crops fail? Not because of a blight or a drought necessarily, but because God was angry, or a witch had cursed your field, or a demon was whispering temptations into your neighbor's ear. Every unexplained illness, every sudden death, every stroke of bad luck was interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure or malevolent magical interference. And what could you do about it? Pray, fast, pay more tithes. Maybe accuse an old woman of witchcraft and watch her get dunked in the pond. It was a world where logic and reason, as we understand them, were secondary to a pervasive, all-encompassing fear of the supernatural. You lived in constant dread of eternal damnation. The church, while offering a glimmer of hope for salvation, also wielded the terrifying power of hellfire. Every sin, every transgression, every impure thought could condemn you to an eternity of torment. And for a peasant, life was full of temptations. Hunger could lead to stealing. Despair could lead to blasphemy. Lust was always a sin. The constant moral policing, the fear of confessing your sins to a priest who held immense power over your spiritual fate, added another layer of psychological pressure. It wasn't just physical pain. It was a deep, spiritual terror that permeated every aspect of your existence. And privacy, what privacy? You lived in a single room with your entire family, possibly multiple generations, and your animals. Every bodily function, every argument, every intimate moment was on full display. There were no closed doors, no quiet corners. Your life was an open book, not just to your family, but to your neighbors in the tightly knit, gossipy village. Social pressure was immense. Deviate from the norm, and you'd face not just the Lord's wrath, but the ostracization of your entire community, which was, effectively, a death sentence. Let's talk about the tools of your trade. We mentioned wooden plows, scythes, sickles, but let's get specific about the utter inefficiency of it all. Imagine trying to break up hard, clay-rich soil with a wooden plowshare, barely scratching the surface, pulled by oxen that are probably half-starved themselves. Then you have to broadcast your seeds by hand, hoping the wind doesn't carry them away, hoping the birds don't eat them, hoping they land in fertile soil. Then comes the weeding on your hands and knees, for hours, under the scorching sun or in the driving rain, pulling up every single weed by hand. And then the harvest. Imagine cutting every stalk of grain with a small, curved sickle, bending over, hour after hour, your back screaming, your hands blistered and bleeding. And then thrashing it, beating the grain from the stalks with a flail, dust, and chaff filling your lungs, until your arms feel like they're going to fall off. This wasn't just labor. It was an endless, repetitive, physically destructive ritual. And the animals, your most valuable possessions, often living right there with you. Your cow, your pig, your chickens. They're not pets, they're your livelihood, your source of meager protein, your manure. But they're also sources of disease, parasites, and constant mess. And if one of them dies, it's a catastrophe. Your cow dying means no milk, no cheese, no future calves, no plowing. It means your family is one step closer to starvation. The anxiety around your livestock must have been immense. The lack of knowledge was another profound horror. You were illiterate, almost certainly. Books were rare, expensive, and reserved for the clergy and nobility. Your understanding of medicine was based on folklore and superstition. Your understanding of the wider world was based on rumor and distorted tales. You didn't know why things happened. You didn't know about germs, or nutrition, or crop rotation, or effective sanitation. You just lived, suffered, and died, often without understanding the underlying causes of your misery. This intellectual darkness, this profound ignorance enforced by circumstance, must have been its own kind of prison. And the sounds of medieval peasant life. Beyond the constant low hum of insects, the creak of your hut, the crackle of the fire, the sounds of your animals, it was the sounds of labor. The rhythmic thud of the flail, the scrape of the hoe, the lowing of oxen, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. And the human sounds, the hacking coughs, the cries of sick children, the murmuring of prayers, the occasional drunken shout, the constant, low-level drone of fatigue. There was no escape from these sounds, just as there was no escape from the smells or the dirt. It was an all-encompassing sensory assault of primal existence. Then there's the justice system, or rather the lack thereof. If you were accused of a crime, you didn't get a fair trial with a jury of your peers. You got the Lord's court, presided over by the Lord or his bailiff, who was often a bully and entirely biased. Evidence, not really a thing. Confession, often extracted under duress, was king, or you might face a trial by ordeal. Imagine being forced to plunge your hand into boiling water or carry a red-hot iron, and if your wound didn't heal perfectly in 3 days, you were guilty. or being thrown into a cold pond. If you floated, you were guilty, because water, being pure, would reject the impure. If you sank, you were innocent, but probably drowned. This wasn't justice. It was a terrifying, arbitrary lottery where your life and limb depended on superstition and the whim of your accuser. And what about leisure? We touched on it, but let's be clear. Leisure was not a concept. There were holy days, feast days, maybe a few days off for major festivals. But even then, there was always something to do. Repairs to the hut, mending clothes, preparing for the next season. The idea of free time for self-improvement or hobbies or just relaxation was utterly alien. Your life was a treadmill of survival. The only breaks were forced by exhaustion or the absolute necessity of a religious observance. And even then, your mind was probably still preoccupied with the next meal, the next harvest, the next threat. The lack of hope, this perhaps is the most insidious horror of all. There was no concept of progress, no belief that life would get better for you or for your children. The world was static. You were born into your station and you died in it. There was no escape hatch, no lottery ticket, no GI Bill, no social mobility. Your ancestors were peasants. You were a peasant. Your descendants would be peasants. The cycles of nature, the cycles of poverty, the cycles of oppression were immutable. This crushing sense of fatalism, of being trapped in an endless, grinding cycle of misery, must have been soul-destroying. The only hope was for a better afterlife, a paradise earned through suffering in this one. And let's not forget the constant, low-level violence that permeated everyday life. Not just war, but local disputes, fights over land, over animals, over insults. There was no effective police force. Disputes were often settled with fists, rocks, or tools. Injuries were common, and as we know, injuries often led to infection and death. Your neighbor could be your closest ally in the fields, but also your most dangerous enemy after a few too many swigs of ale. So when you consider all of this, the constant hunger, the rampant disease, the backbreaking labor, the brutal oppression, the arbitrary justice, the pervasive superstition, the lack of knowledge, the utter absence of privacy, comfort, or hope, it paints a picture not just of hardship, but of a life that was fundamentally, terrifyingly inhumane by modern standards. It was a life lived on the very edge of survival, where every day was a gamble, and the stakes were always life or death. And yet humanity endured. They found ways to cope, through faith, through community, through sheer stubbornness. But let's not mistake endurance for enjoyment. Let's not romanticize the simple life of the peasant. It was anything but simple. It was a relentless, brutal struggle against forces far beyond their control, a daily dance with death, disease, and despair. You're still here. Good, I knew you had the stomach for it. Because what we've discussed so far, that's just the surface layer of grime. We haven't even scraped away the truly putrid, festering reality that was the soul-annihilating existence of the medieval peasant. We're going deeper now, into the very muck and mire of their daily lives. Let's talk about the smell. I mentioned it before, but did you truly internalize it? Imagine a smell that permeates everything. Your clothes, your hair, your food, the very air you breathe. It's the smell of unwashed bodies, not just a day's sweat, but weeks, months, years of accumulated grime. It's the acrid tang of wood smoke constantly stinging your nostrils. It's the sickly sweet scent of decaying food scraps, mixed with the sharp ammonia of human and animal urine that seeps into the dirt floor. It's the heavy, earthy stench of manure, constantly churned into the mud outside your door, clinging to your boots, brought inside by every step. It's the metallic, cloying smell of blood from slaughtered animals, mingled with the faint, unsettling odor of unburied or poorly buried human dead. and underlying it all, the pervasive, undeniable stink of sewage, because there was no sewage system. Human waste was simply dumped into the streets, or into a pit nearby, or just wherever. Every time it rained, that delightful concoction would flow through the village, a river of filth, carrying disease and despair right to your doorstep. You wouldn't just smell it, it would be in your mouth, a constant, low-level taste of decay and filth. Your senses would be under constant assault, a relentless reminder of the squalor you inhabited. And the vermin, oh the vermin. Your hut wasn't just shared with your family. It was a 5-star hotel for rats, mice, lice, fleas, bedbugs, and cockroaches. They were everywhere, crawling in your straw mattress, scurrying across your floor, nested in the thatch of your roof, feasting on your meager food stores. They carried diseases, they bit you, they kept you awake. They were a constant, visible manifestation of the filth and lack of control in your life. You could swat at them, you could try to trap them, but they were an insurmountable army, a permanent, disgusting fixture of your existence. Now let's talk about the children. We mentioned infant mortality, but let's delve into the lives of those who did survive. From the moment they could walk, they were put to work. There was no childhood as we understand it. No playgrounds, no toys beyond a stick or a rock, no school. Their education was in the fields, learning to weed, to scare birds, to gather firewood. By the age of 6 or 7, they were full participants in the brutal economy of the household. Herding animals, fetching water, helping with the harvest. Their tiny bodies were subjected to the same backbreaking labor as the adults, leading to deformities, stunted growth, and early exhaustion. They saw death constantly, siblings dying, neighbors dying, animals dying. They were exposed to the same diseases, the same hunger, the same cold. Their innocence was stolen almost before it had a chance to bloom, replaced by a grim understanding of survival and their future. A carbon copy of their parents' miserable existence. The lack of medical knowledge extends beyond just bloodletting. Imagine a broken bone. No x-rays, no casts, no pain medication. Just agony and a limb that might heal crooked or get infected, leaving you crippled for life. A deep cut, no antibiotics, no sterile dressings. Infection was almost guaranteed, leading to gangrene, amputation, if you were lucky enough to find someone to do it and survive the shock or slow, agonizing death. The constant pain from chronic conditions, arthritis from years of labor, toothaches, untreated injuries, must have been a daily companion. Your body was not a temple. It was a decaying machine, constantly breaking down, with no mechanic in sight. And the concept of time, forget schedules, appointments, or the precise ticking of a clock. Your life was governed by the sun, the seasons, and the church bells. Time was cyclical, not linear. It was about the rhythm of sowing and reaping, of sunrise and sunset. This meant a deep connection to nature, yes, but also a profound powerlessness against its whims. A sudden frost, a prolonged rain, a scorching drought, these weren't just inconveniences, they were existential threats that dictated whether you lived or died. There was no catching up, no making up for lost time. If the harvest failed, you starved. If the winter was too harsh, you froze. You were utterly at the mercy of forces you could neither control nor fully comprehend. The psychological impact of this relentless, unchanging misery is almost impossible for us to grasp. Imagine a life without beauty. No art, no literature, no music beyond crude folk songs, no grand vistas, unless you lived near one and had the time to appreciate it. Your world was utilitarian, functional, and ugly. The lack of intellectual stimulation, the illiteracy, The narrow confines of your world meant that your mind had little to feast on beyond gossip, superstition, and the grinding realities of survival. This mental starvation, coupled with the constant physical pain and fear, must have led to widespread depression, anxiety, and a deep, pervasive sense of hopelessness. How did they maintain their sanity? Perhaps through the absolute certainty of their faith, the promise of a better afterlife. Or perhaps many simply didn't. Consider the constant threat of dispossession. You worked the land, but it wasn't yours. If you displeased the Lord, if you couldn't pay your dues, if you were too old or too sick to work, you could be thrown off your land. Your family, homeless, with nowhere to go, no social safety net. This fear must have been a constant, chilling presence, forcing compliance, stifling any spark of rebellion. You were one bad harvest, one missed payment, one angry lord away from utter destitution and death. And the wild animals. Outside the village, the world was truly wild. Wolves, bears in some regions, wild boars. These weren't just creatures of folklore. They were a very real threat to your livestock and occasionally to your children. You had to protect your animals, often bringing them inside your hut at night, adding to the noise, the smell, and the disease. The balance between human settlement and untamed wilderness was precarious, and the wilderness often won. Even the community, while a source of solace and shared burden, could also be a source of constant pressure and petty tyranny. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Feuds could fester for generations. Accusations of witchcraft, theft, or moral failings could ruin a life. There was no escape from the watchful eyes of your neighbors, no anonymity. You're still here. Incredible. Most people tap out after the vermin and the dysentery. But you, my brave, masochistic history junkies, you crave more. You want to stare into the abyss, and let me tell you, the medieval peasant was the abyss. We've scraped the bottom of the barrel, but we haven't quite licked it clean yet. Let's talk about the water. Oh, the water. Forget your filtered, purified municipal tap water. Your water source was probably the local well or a stream that ran through the village. A stream that also served as a convenient dumping ground for human and animal waste. A well that was likely contaminated by runoff from the very fields fertilized with, you guessed it, more human and animal waste. You drank it. You cooked with it. You probably washed your hands, rarely in it. This wasn't just a risk. It was a guaranteed daily dose of every pathogen known to man. Every sip was a gamble. Every drink a potential death sentence. Diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, these weren't just diseases. They were background noise, the constant hum of your intestines trying to expel the horrors you'd consumed. And dehydration, a common killer. Imagine being sick, feverish, desperately thirsty, and knowing that the only water available is probably what made you sick in the first place. A vicious, inescapable cycle of filth. And the food wasn't just monotonous gruel. It was often contaminated gruel. Weevils in your flour were a given. Mold on your bread, just scrape it off. Ergot, a fungus that grew on rye, could cause terrifying hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene. St. Anthony's fire. Imagine eating your staple food and suddenly your limbs are burning, you're seeing demons, and your fingers or toes are turning black and falling off, and you wouldn't know why. You'd think it was divine punishment, a demonic possession, anything but a microscopic fungus on your grain. This wasn't a rare occurrence. Ergotism outbreaks were a terrifying reality, adding another layer of inexplicable horror to an already brutal existence. Then there's the cold. Oh, the brutal, bone-chilling cold of winter. Your Waterland daub hut, with its thin walls and unglazed windows, offered little protection. The central hearth provided some warmth, but the smoke filled the room and the heat quickly dissipated. Imagine huddling with your entire family, animals included, on a dirt floor under a few thin blankets, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the walls, the frost forming on the inside. Chilblains, frostbite, pneumonia, these were constant threats. Children, the elderly, and the already infirm often didn't survive the winter. Every breath was a painful reminder of the cold seeping into your very bones. And if the firewood ran out, you froze. Simple as that. No central heating, no emergency services, just the relentless, unforgiving grip of winter. And the flip side, the heat. Summer, too, was a torment. Sweltering days in the fields under the relentless sun with no shade, no cool water, just the constant, draining heat. Sunstroke, dehydration, exhaustion, and the flies, billions of them drawn to the filth, the animals, the unburied waste, buzzing, landing on your food, your face, your open wounds, spreading disease with every touch. The summer wasn't a time of leisure. It was a different kind of hell, full of sweat, dust, and insects. Let's talk about the lack of personal security. Beyond the grand wars, your life was constantly at risk from petty violence. Bandits roamed the roads, preying on anyone foolish enough to travel. Rogue soldiers, deserters, or even the Lord's own men could decide to take what they wanted from your village, your food, your livestock, your daughters. There was no police force to call, no standing army to protect you. You were utterly vulnerable. Your only defense was the flimsy courage of your neighbors, or the hope that the Lord's distant castle would provide some theoretical protection. But often, the Lord himself was the greatest threat. The cycle of debt was a silent killer. You constantly owed the Lord rent, fees for the mill, the oven, the forge. You owed the church your tithes. You often had to borrow seeds or tools, creating an inescapable spiral of obligation. You were always perpetually in the red. There was no way to save, no way to build wealth, no way to break free. Every ounce of your labor, every morsel of your food was already claimed before you even produced it. It was economic slavery, a life sentence of perpetual poverty. And the mental landscape of such a life. Imagine the profound boredom. No books, no music beyond simple songs, no theater, no varied conversation. Your world was the same faces, the same tasks, the same anxieties day in and day out. The sheer, soul-crushing monotony. How did they escape? Through alcohol, perhaps, if they could afford the rough ale. Through prayer and the promise of heaven. But mostly through sheer, grim endurance. Your mind was as confined as your body, starved of stimulation, condemned to replay the same fears and the same tasks endlessly. The physical deformities and chronic pain, years of stooping, lifting, and repetitive motions led to crippling arthritis, spinal problems, and joint damage by the time they were young adults. Malnutrition often caused rickets, leading to bowed legs and weakened bones. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C caused bleeding gums, tooth loss on top of the decay, and extreme fatigue. Anemia was rampant. Your body wasn't just tired, it was fundamentally broken, a testament to a lifetime of abuse and neglect. Every movement was likely accompanied by a dull ache, a sharp twinge, or a grinding pain. And the psychological toll of constant death. We touched on it, but imagine living in a world where death was not an abstract concept, but a daily visitor. Your parents, your siblings, your children, your friends, your neighbors, all dying young, often horribly and without explanation. How do you process that grief? How do you maintain hope or even sanity when every bond you form is so fragile, so easily severed by disease or famine or violence? It must have led to a profound desensitization, a grim acceptance of loss, or perhaps a deep, unspoken trauma that permeated every family and every community. Finally, the utter lack of agency. You had no control over your life. None. Your lord controlled your land, your marriage, your movement, your justice. The weather controlled your food. Disease controlled your health. The church controlled your soul. You were a pawn, a piece of property, a disposable unit of labor in a vast, indifferent system. Your choices were minimal, your voice unheard, your destiny predetermined. This profound powerlessness, this absolute lack of freedom, must have been the ultimate horror. To live a life where you are not truly master of your own fate, where every aspect of your existence is dictated by external, often cruel forces. So there you have it, the full, unvarnished, putrid reality of being a medieval peasant. It wasn't just hard, it was a systematic dismantling of human dignity, a relentless assault on body, mind, and spirit. It was a life lived on the very precipice of oblivion, where the line between survival and total annihilation was razor-thin and often crossed. And still there are more layers, the true, unspeakable depths of despair, the things that even I, your sleepless guide through history's nightmares, hesitate to fully articulate. But fear not, the night is long, the past is vast, and the horrors, they never truly end, not as long as there are stories to tell and minds brave enough to listen.